So what I always like to do, what I like to start off with, is kind of a quick overview of SSRN. And so here's some information, and I'm certain everybody can read it fine. But the fourth bullet's really the one that I want to kind of try to highlight. And the fourth bullet says levels a playing field amongst researchers. So what we like to think about from an SSRN perspective is that the fact that it just doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter if you're at Harvard. It doesn't matter if you're at Michigan. It doesn't matter if you're from Monroe Community College in Rochester, New York, where I live. It just doesn't matter. If you write research, give the research a chance to breathe. Give it a chance to be out there. Give it a chance to be in the conversation so that others can build cool, new, innovative research on top of that. So our traditional tagline, our traditional approach has been tomorrow's research today. So when we started to look at research, what we would do is we would have this early stage research. We would get content into SSRN well in advance of publication. So just a basic data point. When we looked at the Journal of Finance, Journal of Financial Economics, we had every single paper that the Journal of Financial Economics published in 2015. We had it in the SSRN library, every paper but one, in the SSRN library 3.5 years in advance. So researchers were able to build on this research. They were able to access this research 3.5 years in advance of publication. So that's what we meant by early stage research. That's what we meant by tomorrow's research today. But your papers have been classified also by the team into management, finance, economics, entrepreneurship, philosophy, political science, sustainability, into a couple of areas of humanities, and they're also appearing on our new network, Women's and Gender Studies. So this is a law professor sharing his research in all of these different areas. I mean, I was wonderfully surprised by it. So JJ, what I wanted to do is I just wanted to give a chance for people to hear the perspective of what we're talking about, this different platforms and things like that, from somebody who actually is living and breathing it. So it wasn't just SSRNs. So how are just to pull a couple of things out of the abstract that you pulled together of your views on it for the conference. So talk a little bit about how you see different platforms bringing together the different disciplines. How do you see it from your perspective at Michigan?
Yeah, so I guess unlike some researchers out there, I come from two disciplines. So I've trained as a lawyer and I've trained as an economist, which right from the beginning made me think very differently about sometimes the same topic. And depending on the audience I was engaging with, I would think about the topics differently. And I guess I've continued to believe that was valuable. So in my research in recent years, I've worked with business school professors, I've worked with public policy scholars, I'm even these days working with people at the School of Information here at Michigan, social work faculty, and so on. And I think I've come up in an age of SSRN and other online tools. And for me, having quick access to a ton of information has been the milieu from the beginning. If I really want to find a particular thing, it's usually not too hard, especially when I have a librarian that's able to help me. If I want to instead attack a particular problem, then it's a little more difficult because one of the things I've discovered, especially in my research, my economics and empirical research, is that there are lots of social scientists that do empirical research. They oftentimes use different terms for the same basic tools, and when you look at projects that focus on the same issues, different disciplines just make a much bigger deal about certain types of research questions. So economists, especially empirical economists, are very interested in causal relationships. Statisticians are much more interested in prediction, and even so, a lot of times things that economists are sorting out now have been sorted out by statisticians for a long time, just sometimes under different names. And at least, I think this is where the future heads. But now, with the access to a place that at least gives some cursory organization that categorizes papers by subject matter as much as by discipline, you have a chance of discovering those connections when you might never have been able to do that in the past. So law schools are increasingly, or at least some of them are increasingly interdisciplinary, and that's really because, even though there's a law library here at the University of Michigan Law School, a fantastic one actually, I almost never go into it. I use its services all the time, but they're mostly online services and ways that allow me to access essentially non-legal resources. And I think, Greg, your point was exactly right, that more information is just more information. And I don't think these days the problem is having access, at least for somebody like me at the University of Michigan. I mean, I can usually get access to anything that's out there one way or another. The problem is really figuring out how to not make it take a ton of time, to the point where I'm not even willing to engage in the hunt. And time is my most valuable resource. And as platforms get better and better able to kind of identify where I'm heading, predict where I'm heading, I think that the people being siloed into disciplines is going to become less and less a reality at universities. I mean, it's kind of interesting you mentioned gender and women's studies, because on Friday I'm having a brainstorming session with the director of a gender program here at the University of Michigan. We know each other. I haven't seen her in a few years, but she knows about some of the things I've been working on. I know about some of the things she's working on, and she wants to get together to talk about potential ways of collaborating. I think that has a lot to do with the fact that we run across each other's stuff in ways that never would have happened if we were just using our department libraries.
So, I talked about the second stage of classification, right, where we take your law paper and we find other homes for it across the 29 other disciplines, the 29 other networks within SSRN. So I know that you have a view in this, but it's this translation problem, right? It's we're trying to translate the way that the economist says, ABC, to the way that the lawyer says ABC, to the way that the finance professor, even if it's finance and economics, they still speak differently, right? Securities versus economic principles versus, let alone corporate governance or sustainability or a lot of these other areas. So give us your views into this kind of the seeing into other disciplines, right? The importance of it, the ability to be much more efficient because we've learned from what others have done, and not just in our strong tie communities, but in these other communities around us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest hurdles in research these days has more to do with the fact that we're spending a lot of time reinventing wheels across departments, and I think that there have always been scholars that are capable of leaning outside of their departments and are taking what's really interesting and useful from another discipline. But honestly, I'd say the average academic just doesn't have the time or maybe not even the ability to make those kinds of connections in a way that's really efficient. So it makes much more sense for me to continue to dive and dig into my own discipline, my own strong tie network, and try to please that network and innovate within that group of people, rather than trying to get out on the edge of thinking about if we think about how far any particular department has gotten in working on a particular problem, that's where I want to be. I want to be out there on the edge, and I think you're absolutely right that the weak ties. I mean, right now I'm not doing any collaborative work with anybody at the University of Michigan Law School, but I have ongoing research with people outside of the law school here, I'm going to try. I don't know exactly how that happened, but certainly part of it has to do with the fact that we've connected. So I've certainly connected with co-authors and collaborators by just running across papers on SSRN that, because of certain keywords or because of where they wind up on my feed, I just happen to see them. And it turns out we have another connection, or I recognize their name from someplace, and that kind of, just that extra push helps me pull on that weak tie and hopefully, I'd like to think, make real progress on my research.
It's interesting. I had a conversation at lunch, and the conversation at lunch was kind of this evolving role of librarians, right? You know, that they used to be those connections, right? You used to walk in and you know, I'm old enough to remember card catalogs, right? And God forbid you actually had to flip through a card catalog to find something, but the librarian actually helped you find things. And so what we've done is we've tried to move that forward with this curation process within SSRN. And a lot of the librarians that I talk to now, you know, the library schools have been rebranded as iSchools because we're talking about this information services and this ability to see into the different tools and start to take advantage of that. Are you seeing anything happening from your perspective in like machine learning or other areas, or is it still a little bit early? I mean, I sometimes think.
I think it's a little bit early, but I also think that you know that where we're going to see this is likely to be at places like SSRN. So you know, if I walk into a library today, the reason why it doesn't work the same way as it used to is that there's just simply so much more. And so when libraries and you know, maybe I'm naive and there's always been so much more. But then the library is ultimately curated because a lot of stuff that's just older just gets thrown out. So we wind up just reinventing things over and over again. And I don't think that's useful. In the long run, though, we're not going to have to go and kind of poke around in a set of materials that is probably ever growing larger. Instead, we're going to have a personalized set that is kind of distinct, you know, that is determined by, you know, what seems relevant to us, the methods or the topics or so on. And, you know, unsupervised machine learning, I don't know of anybody that's using it, but, you know, supervised machine learning usually involves a human trying to figure out how best to predict what another human, for example, might want to see. But there's no reason to potentially rely on that in the long term. Like, you're going to be able to take papers, see the kinds of works they cite, see the kinds of words that are used in those papers, the kinds of words that are used in other papers in the same topic, and draw connections between them. You know, machine learning algorithms are going to be able to do this, and eventually they're going to get good. I mean, at least if there's a demand for this sort of thing, they're going to get. It's going to get to the point where instead of just kind of going through titles and trying to see whether the title sounds right or useful to me, or reading an abstract to see whether or not I should continue reading the paper. You know, I mean, the papers that are going to be suggested are going to be pretty much on point, and I'm going to feel much more confident that I know what's been done and what's out there. So that instead of, you know, I don't know, maybe I'm a little more compulsive about this than some, but I really, you know, I really hate the idea that I'm writing a paper that somebody's already written, and the amount of time that one can spend just trying to make themselves feel confident that that's not going on. Seems like a lot of wasted time. Like, you know, it should be the kind of thing that you should be able to check quickly. And I think, you know, machine learning and other future technologies, I think, are going to be able to do this for us.
So when you talk about citations, we actually do have citations. So if you look at the SSRN page, you'll see downloads, you'll see citations. We actually are right now starting to integrate Plum, the Plum Print. So Plum is another tool that also shows a whole bunch of media mentions and all kinds of other things. That one's being added. We've had citations for about 15 years. Now it's citations within the SSRN library. So we look at the corpus, our development from ITX broke apart the PDF into the component parts. We look at what references what, and then we show that linking. Now for us, citations is not a vanity metric. And I think this gets to the heart of what you're talking about. Downloads are great, but we do validation on downloads because we want the right number. We want to be able to compare across different pieces of paper or research papers downloaded. Citations are the same thing. In the SSRN library, you go to an abstract page, you see the number of downloads, you see the citations, you see the references as a tab, and you see citations as a tab. And again, the idea is not to have a big vanity metric. The idea is to help the researcher create innovative research faster. So what we mean by that is, I look at a paper, I can see what papers it was influenced by, and what papers it influenced. Because as any of the researchers know, as anybody who writes research knows, it's not necessarily that one paper. I may want to see the paper 2 or 3 influences prior back, or I may want to see what came out of it afterwards. So for us, citations are to help us flow through the literature not just to show another vanity metric with more numbers. So it actually is there for maybe a different reason than some of the people think.